start us with. A diverse group, including businesses, physicians, and environmentalists, consider the Toxic Substance Control Act of 1976 inadequate. Do you support amending the Toxic Substance Control Act to modernize the way the federal government regulates chemicals that are used in commerce and industry? Why or why not?
The question is whether I would support the modernization of the Toxic Substances Control Act of 1976, and I would suggest any federal law that is close to 40 years old should be subject to review. Technologies have changed in 40 years. Remediation programs and processes have changed in 40 years. Much has changed about our economy in 40 years, and so I would favor a complete review of bills because I suspect, whether it's the environmental community or even the business community, there are going to be instances and parts of a bill that's 40 years old now that will need to be modernized. So the answer is yes.
Thank you. I just want to address one thing from the Congressman's answer. It's actually not true, Congressman, that the stimulus was the biggest source of our deficit. Not that I agree with how the stimulus went down, but $1.8 trillion of our deficit was from the Bush tax cuts. $1.4 trillion of our deficit were from the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan combined. Less than that was from the stimulus.
Single source.
Well, the Bush tax cuts were far more. So the Toxic Substance Control Act, I wish I knew more about what the details were in this act, but I have to agree with what the Congressman said about review based on new technologies and new issues. I want to make sure that we're not abiding by old science and old review, but I would love to hear more about it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Let's try this one. Quality public education is essential for a strong, viable, and sustainable democratic society. How do you think the federal, state, and local governments should share in the responsibility of providing for such an education for our children? Please be specific about common standards, curriculum development, and assessment of teachers. Again, in
90 seconds.
Thank you for asking the question. I think this is a critical question because it's talking about training and education for our next generation. But right now we are losing. Our education is falling behind. And if you look comparatively with other countries, we're not putting the investments into education that we should be. So it starts with funding. We have to be making sure. I'm a product of public schools. My husband is a product of public schools. My daughter is at Lenape Middle School in Central Bucks School District. And by the way, I'm very proud to be endorsed by the National Educational Association and have been really impressed with working with the teachers and the education professionals. We need to be making sure that not only is there adequate funding so that every child can have the incredible opportunities and education that I had, but we need to make sure that we are involving all stakeholders in the process of addressing the other issues you talked about, whether it's assessments and curriculum. Right now, the last thing we want is a top-down approach. I think No Child Left Behind has exactly that wrong approach. Not only did it say that the federal government could tell what the standards should be, but it also was an unfunded mandate. Combination was toxic to our local schools, and now they're teaching to the test to meet those assessment numbers. I want to make sure that our teachers and our communities and our parents, and I have a stop sign, are part of this process of deciding how best to train the next generation of Americans.
Thank you.
This is one of the areas where my opponent and I are going to agree significantly in areas and disagree in others. And one area that I'll point out that we disagree is that my opponent believes that more money will equate to better outcomes or better education, and I don't believe that that's shown to be the case. I've done school law as a private practicing attorney. I've represented the poorest school district of Bucks County, so I understand the challenges in public education. My wife is a high school teacher. She's an educator. She teaches biology and advanced placement courses here in Bucks County. And I've often said about our 6 children, we value education above just about anything, to the extent that we would mortgage everything we have personally for a good education for our children. But we also need to recognize that there are limits that the taxpayers can endure, and we need to be very smart when we're spending taxpayer dollars that we demand outcomes that are sufficient. The federal government, and your question was, what's the proper role of the federal government versus the state and the local? I'm one who believes in a strong local influence and involvement in local education. Having represented, as I said, a school district in Bucks County, I have much greater faith in a locally elected school director to make the right decisions with respect to curriculum, to transportation, to nutrition, than some nameless, faceless bureaucrat in Washington who thinks that they know better than we know in Bucks County about how to deliver that education. Finally, the role of the federal government fully funds special education. That would do more to help the local educators, the local administrators and teachers than anything else Washington is trying to do right now.
Thank you. Starting with Fitzpatrick on this one. Nearly half of Pennsylvania's workers lack access to a single paid sick day. If elected, would you support the Healthy Families Act, guaranteeing workers of businesses with 15 or more employees the right to earn up to 7 paid sick days?
There were two parts to that question. The first was a statement, and then the second was, I think, a reference to a bill. Was it a bill?
Yes, the Healthy Families Act, which is supposed to guarantee workers with 15 or more employees the right to earn up to 7 paid sick days.
I see my time's already 30 seconds, and I'm not sure if I get my time put back.
Well,
But let me just say this. The first statement, well, I thought that was a pretty bold statement. You said up to half of Pennsylvania workers lack access to a single paid sick day. I'm not sure that I agree with the assumption of that question. I visited employers and employees in Bucks County. I have to tell you, first of all, with the public employees, the largest employers in Bucks County are the school districts and the hospitals. The larger employers, the county government, all of those employees have access to good benefit programs, including a good required paid sick day program. The small business employers that I visit, they treat their employees as if they're members of the family. Most small business employers also have sick day benefit programs for their employees. So I'm not sure that I agree with the underlying assumption, but let's assume the underlying assumption is correct. You're asking whether or not I would support a federal law that would require employers, businesses of 15 or more employees to now have mandated upon them a federally required sick day program. Let me just tell you what the small business employers told me when I visited them. Remember I said higher taxes and complicated tax code is killing their ability to expand. Number two, a close number two, these regulations coming out of Washington, I know they're well-intentioned, but every time Washington thinks they have a good idea and they impose it on the small business community of America, it creates paperwork requirements, regulations, and what it actually does, a small business that might have 14 employees that wants to hire somebody next year may not hire the 15th employee because of a well-intentioned federal regulation that is actually going to hurt the people it's designed to help.
You. Got it.
Thank you. Where is the citation of the number from, 50%? Do you know?
Oh, no, I don't know.
All right, well, maybe after the fact.
Right.
But look, I think this is clearly not... The federal government started with the FMLA, the Family Medical Leave Act, back in 1993, I believe. Maybe I'm off on the year. But I think that we absolutely need to make sure that our workers could take sick days and not be penalized for it and not lose their jobs from it. At the same time, we absolutely need to make sure that we don't overburden small businesses. I mean, this is always a balance. We've got to make sure that both are covered, and we all know that the economy is such a hard time for so many people, and you have too many Pennsylvanians without jobs and too many Pennsylvanians working more shifts for less money. We need to make sure that if they have an illness in their family or an illness of their own, that the last thing they need to worry about is losing another job. So I absolutely would support making sure that Pennsylvanians can take a day off if they're sick, and or whatever I don't know the exact details of this bill, but absolutely we need to make sure that more people are not finding themselves unemployed because they have sicknesses that are, of course, out of their control and can be devastating to a family.
All right, let's move away from legislation. for this question. What specific actions do you advocate for growing jobs in the 8th Congressional District?
Great. The billion-dollar question, among others. Well, I've said multiples of them already. And again, this starts with our recognition that there's too many Pennsylvanians who are unemployed. And I've been door knocking all over the district talking to voters. And this is such a multi-generational problem right now. You know, I often will knock on a door and there'll be not only the matriarch or patriarch answering the door who will talk about their own job problems, but then sitting in the living room is the grown child who's graduated from college and can't find a job. So look, I want to start with making sure that we remove the disincentives for businesses. I want to make sure we lower the corporate tax rate. I want to make sure that we eliminate the loopholes on the other end. I want to give credits to businesses for creating the jobs here. I've been a small business owner. I also know how tough it is, the regulations that keep us back. I want to make sure that we don't have unnecessary red tape and regulations that make it harder for us not only to create the businesses, but also to cover our employees once we have them. I also want to make sure that we're making smart investments that will boost the economy. So that means looking at the local and national businesses to see where we can make the most difference. We talked earlier about, and I'm speaking very fast because I see the time, we need to be making investments in energy businesses, in technology, in research, in our transportation and infrastructure. There's so many areas that we could be doing so much more to build the economy here. I've got a stop sign.